The last signaled observation deck of the Meridian hummed with a silence that felt almost sacred. Captain Alina Voss stood before the panoramic viewport, her reflection ghosting across the star-filled expanse beyond. 43 years she'd spent among these stars, and never once had the universe felt so utterly alien to her as it did now. "Captain, we're receiving another transmission." Lieutenant Marcus Chen's voice cut through her thoughts. Steady, despite the tremor she detected underneath. Same coordinates. Same pattern. Lena turned from the viewport, her boots clicking softly against the metal floor as she crossed to the communications station. The rest of her bridge crew watched in tense silence. They'd been tracking this signal for 6 days now. Ever since they'd arrived in the Kepler 442 system to investigate the disappearance of the colony ship, Providence. "Play it," she commanded. The speakers crackled to life, and once again, that sound filled the bridge. It wasn't language, not exactly. It was something else. Something that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and speak directly to the most primitive parts of the human brain. It was the sound of a predator's growl, mixed with the scraping of metal on bone, underscored by a rhythmic pulse that matched the human heartbeat exactly. Alina watched her crew's faces pale. She felt it too, that primal urge to run, to hide, to do anything but stand there and listen. But she'd been chosen to lead this mission precisely because she didn't flinch. Humanity needed captains who could stare into the abyss without blinking. "Analysis?" she asked, keeping her voice level. Chen pulled up a holographic display, his fingers dancing across the controls. "The signal originates from the Providence's last known coordinates, but the ship itself isn't there anymore. What's there instead is?" He hesitated, then continued. "Ma'am, there's a structure. Massive. It wasn't there when the Providence first arrived 3 months ago. Our scans suggest it's approximately 15 kilometers in diameter and composed of an alloy we can't identify." 15 kilometers, Elena repeated quietly. "Built in 3 months, or revealed in 3 months," offered Dr. Sarah Kimura from the science station. The astrophysicist had been unusually quiet since they'd entered the system. "Captain, I've been analyzing the spectral data from that structure. It's absorbing light across almost the entire electromagnetic spectrum. It's not just sitting there. It's feeding." Alina moved to stand beside the science station, studying the data scrolling across Kimura's screens. The structure appeared as a dark sphere on their sensors, a hole in space that seemed to devour everything around it. Around its perimeter, debris floated in a slowly decaying orbit. Some of the larger pieces were recognizable as hull plating. Human hull plating. "The Providence," Elena whispered. "And the Providence wasn't alone," Chen added grimly. He expanded the tactical display, highlighting dozens of smaller debris fields scattered throughout the system. "Captain, I'm detecting wreckage from at least 40 vessels. Different designs, different alloys, different technologies. Some of this debris is centuries old, maybe older." The bridge fell silent as the implications settled over them like a shroud. This wasn't a first contact situation. This was a hunting ground, and humanity had just walked into it. "Ma'am, we should leave," said Commander James Rodriguez, her first officer. The big man's voice was unusually tight. "Whatever happened here, we're outmatched. We need to return to Earth. Report this. Let command decide the next move." Lena understood his fear. She shared it. But she also understood something else, something that had been hammered into her during her decades of service. Humanity didn't survive by running. They survived by learning, by adapting, by refusing to yield even when the odds seemed impossible. "We came here to find the Providence," she said quietly. 4,000 colonists, James. 4,000 men, women, and children. Until we know for certain what happened to them, we're not going anywhere." Rodriguez's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He knew her well enough not to argue when she used that tone. "Chen, how long until we're in optimal scanning range of that structure?" "At current speed, 14 hours, Captain. Reduce speed by half. I want us approaching carefully. Sensors active across all spectrums. Kimura, I need you to figure out what that thing is and how it works. Rodriguez, put the crew on tactical alert. If something out there built that structure in 3 months, I want us ready for anything." "Captain," they responded in unison. As her crew moved to execute her orders, Alina returned to the viewport. Out there in the darkness, something ancient and terrible waited. Something that had been waiting for a very long time. Collecting ships like a spider collects flies in its web, but humanity had faced darkness before. They'd faced it in the depths of their own planet's oceans, in the vacuum of space, in the quantum foam of reality itself. And every time, they'd found a way to bring light. Alina pressed her palm against the cool viewport. Feeling the faint vibration of the ship's engines through the material, "Whatever you are," she whispered to the darkness beyond. "You picked the wrong species to hunt." Into the Motha, Meridian drifted through the graveyard of ships, like a ghost among tombstones. Alina stood at her station, eyes fixed on the main display, where the massive structure dominated the view. Up close, it was even more terrifying than their long-range scans had suggested. The surface wasn't smooth, but textured with countless geometric patterns that seemed to shift and reconfigure whenever she looked away and back again. "Captain, I'm picking up life signs." Chen's voice was sharp with urgency. Faint, but definitely human. Coming from inside that structure, Elena's heart lurched. How many? Difficult to say with all the interference, but at least several hundred signatures. They're clustered in what appears to be a central chamber, roughly 3 kilometers beneath the outer shell. Out of 4,000. Elena's hands clenched at her sides, but her voice remained steady. "Can you establish communications?" "Negative. Something about that structure is blocking all our transmission attempts. We'd need to get closer, or..." Chen paused, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Or send someone inside." Rodriguez stepped forward immediately. "Captain, you can't be considering this. We don't know what's in there. This could be a trap." "It's already a trap, Commander," Alina replied, her gaze never leaving the structure. "The question is whether we're brave enough to spring it." She turned to face her crew, seeing the fear in their eyes, but also something else, determination. They were frightened, but they were still here, still ready to do what needed to be done. That was what made them human. "Kimura, what have you learned about this thing?" The scientist pulled up a series of holographic diagrams, her fingers trembling slightly as she manipulated the display. "It's not a ship, Captain. It's more like an organism. The outer shell is semi-organic, constantly regenerating and adapting. The patterns we see on the surface are actually neural pathways, similar to brain tissue, but on a massive scale. In the center, where the life signs are concentrated, that's functioning like a digestive chamber." "Digestive," Alina repeated, the words sitting heavy on her tongue. "It's processing them," Kimura continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever species built this, they don't just kill. They study, they analyze, they consume information. The life signs we're detecting those people are being kept alive, Captain. They're being harvested for knowledge." The bridge fell into a horrified silence. Alina felt rage building in her chest, hot and fierce. This was worse than death. This was violation on a scale she could barely comprehend. "Then we get them out," she said simply. "Chen, Rodriguez, Kimura with me. We're taking a boarding shuttle and going in through one of those surface apertures." "Captain, regulations require you to remain aboard," Rodriguez began. "Regulations were written before we encountered something like this," Alina interrupted. "Those people in there have been trapped for 3 months, being slowly consumed by an alien entity. I won't sit safely on my ship while they suffer." She moved toward the exit, then paused and looked back at her first officer. "You have the con, Commander? If we're not back in 6 hours, take the Meridian back to Earth. Make sure Command knows what's waiting out here." Rodriguez's face was grim, but he nodded. "Understood, Captain." And Alina. He rarely used her first name. "Come back. That's an order from a friend." She managed a small smile. "I'll do my best, James." 30 minutes later, Alina sat in the pilot's seat of the boarding shuttle Defiant. Her 3 crew members strapped in behind her. The small craft detached from the Meridian with a gentle thunk. And Alina fired the maneuvering thrusters, pointing them toward the nearest aperture on the structure's surface as they approached. The patterns on the hull seemed to pulse with awareness. The aperture, a circular opening roughly 20 meters in diameter, began to iris open like a massive eye. "It knows we're coming," Chen observed quietly. "Good," Alina replied, her jaw set. "I want it to know. I want whatever intelligence controls this thing to understand that humanity doesn't abandon its own." The shuttle slipped through the aperture into darkness so complete it seemed to swallow their running lights. Alina activated the full forward illumination array, and the beams cut through the void to reveal a tunnel that stretched impossibly far into the structure's depths. The walls were the same semi-organic material, pulsing with bioluminescent veins that ran in rhythmic patterns. Like a throat, Chimera murmured from behind her. Alina pushed the shuttle forward. Following the tunnel as it curved and twisted through the alien architecture, around them, the walls contracted and expanded in peristaltic waves, as if the structure truly was swallowing them whole.
"I've signed reading strengthening,"
Chen reported. 2 kilometers ahead and down. "Captain, I'm also detecting movement in the walls around us. Multiple contacts closing in on our position." Alina saw them then, emerging from previously invisible seams in the walls. They were roughly humanoid, but wrong in every detail, their bodies covered in the same material as the structure itself. Their heads were featureless except for clusters of sensory organs that tracked the shuttle's movement with unnerving precision. "Contact in 10 seconds, Chen announced, his hand moving to the weapons console. "Hold fire," Alina commanded. "We're not here to fight. We're here to rescue." She increased the shuttle's speed, weaving between the creatures as they reached out with elongated limbs. One managed to grasp the shuttle's hull, and Alina felt the entire craft shudder as something tried to interface with their systems. "It's trying to hack us," Chimera shouted. "Captain, it's trying to download our navigation database, our personnel files, everything." Alina slammed the throttle forward, the sudden acceleration tearing the creature free. "Initiate full system lockdown." "Nothing gets in or out, Captain." The tunnel suddenly opened into a vast chamber, and Alina had to pull hard on the controls to avoid slamming into the far wall. She brought the shuttle around in a tight arc, her eyes widening at what the lights revealed. The chamber was enormous, easily a kilometer across, and hanging from the ceiling by countless organic tethers were hundreds of transparent pods. Inside each pod was a human being, suspended in some kind of viscous fluid, their eyes open but unseeing, their mouths moving in silent screams. "Dear God," Rodriguez whispered. But Alina was already moving. Bringing the shuttle down toward the nearest cluster of pods, "Chen, prepare the cutting tools. Kimura, analyze that fluid. I need to know if we can safely extract them. Rodriguez, you're on weapons. If anything tries to stop us, burn it." As her crew scrambled to obey, Alina stared at the faces in the pods. She saw men and women, elderly and young, even children. All of them trapped in this nightmare, their minds being slowly stripped away by an intelligence that saw them as nothing more than data to be consumed. She keyed the internal come. "Hold on," she said, knowing they couldn't hear her, but needing to say it anyway. "We're getting you out. I promise you, we're getting you out." The shuttle settled onto a platform near the pods, and Alina felt the structure around them shudder, as if in anger. Somewhere in the depths below, something ancient and vast was waking up, and it knew that its prey had just become predators. Asterisk humanity unleashed. Cutting torch screamed against the pod surface, sending sparks cascading into the darkness below. Alina worked with mechanical precision, her hands steady, despite the tremors running through the entire structure. Around her, Chen and Rodriguez moved from pod to pod, their own torches blazing as they freed one survivor after another. The first pod cracked open with a hiss of escaping gas, and the fluid inside gushed out in a thick, luminescent stream. The woman inside collapsed forward, and Alina caught her, lowering her gently to the platform. The woman's eyes were open but unfocused, her lips moving soundlessly. "Kimura, status." Alina shouted over the sound of the torches. "The fluid is a neural interface medium," the scientist called back from the shuttle. She was preparing medical supplies. "It's been keeping them alive, but also keeping them connected to the structure's consciousness. They're in shock, Captain. Their minds have been interfaced with something so alien, so vast, that they can't process it. Alina looked down at the woman in her arms, seeing the terror etched into every line of her face. Then we help them process it later. Right now, we just get them out. More pods split open, and more survivors spilled out onto the platform. Some could stand, stumbling toward the shuttle on shaking legs. Others had to be carried. Alina worked with desperate speed, cutting through pod after pod, her torch leaving glowing scars across the alien material. Then the structure screamed. It wasn't a sound that came through the air. It was something deeper, more fundamental, a vibration that shook the atoms themselves. The walls began to pulse violently, and the organic tethers holding the pods started to retract, pulling the remaining captives up toward the ceiling and away from their rescuers. No. Alina lunged for the nearest rising pod, grabbing onto its base and letting it lift her off the platform. The pod accelerated upward, and she held on with desperate strength, her torch still gripped in her other hand. Below her, she could hear Rodriguez shouting, but she couldn't make out the words over the structure's scream. She activated the torch and drove it into the pod's surface. The material resisted, then gave way, and the pod jerked violently. Alina nearly lost her grip but held on, widening the cut even as the pod rose higher and higher into the darkness above. A hand thrust through the opening she'd made, human fingers grasping desperately at freedom. Alina grabbed the hand and pulled, and a young man emerged from the pod, his eyes wild with fear and something else rage. Pure, burning human rage. "Hold on to me," Alina shouted, and the man wrapped his arms around her waist. Together, they hung from the rising pod as it approached the ceiling. Where Alina could now see what awaited them, the ceiling wasn't solid. It was a membrane, translucent and pulsing, and beyond it she could see the structure's true core. It was a brain, vast and incomprehensible, composed of folded organic matter that stretched away in impossible dimensions. And it was watching them. She could feel its attention like a physical weight, could sense its confusion that its prey had dared to fight back. "You made a mistake," Alina whispered to the alien intelligence. "You thought we were just another species to catalog and consume? But you don't understand what we are." She triggered her torch to maximum power and drove it upward into the membrane. The structure's scream became deafening. The membrane tore like tissue paper, and the pod plunged through the opening into the core chamber beyond. Alina and the man she'd rescued tumbled free, falling through a space that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Reality twisted around them, and Alina caught glimpses of things her mind couldn't process: other chambers, other victims from other species, stretching back through millennia of predation. They slammed into something solid. A platform of the same organic material that composed the structure. Alina rolled to absorb the impact, coming up in a crouch with her torch still blazing in her hand. The young man scrambled to his feet beside her, and together they faced the intelligence that had tortured them. It manifested as a pillar of shifting forms, cycling through the shapes of every species it had ever consumed. Alina saw humans, but also beings of pure energy, crystalline entities, creatures that existed partially in dimensions she couldn't perceive. Each form was perfect, a complete replication based on stolen knowledge. But as Alina watched, the pillar's cycling became erratic. The forms began to glitch and distort, and she realized why. The structure had consumed countless species, absorbed their knowledge and their essence, but it had made a critical error with humanity. It had tried to understand them through logic and analysis, through the careful dissection of their minds and memories. It had never considered that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their knowledge or their technology. It was in their absolute, irrational refusal to accept defeat. "You can copy our bodies," Alina said, her voice carrying across the impossible space. "You can steal our memories, analyze our thoughts, replicate our technology, but you'll never understand what makes us human, because being human isn't about what we know. It's about what we choose to do when everything seems lost." The pillar reformed, becoming a perfect copy of Alina herself. It spoke with her voice, but the words were wrong, alien. "You are biological data. You are patterns to be preserved. Resistance is inefficient. Inefficient, Alina repeated and laughed. It was a wild sound, tinged with exhaustion and fear, but also defiant joy. You're right. Everything humans do is inefficient. We're emotional, irrational, stubborn, and we never know when to quit. And that's exactly why you'll never beat us. She raised her torch and pointed it at her own reflection. My crew is down there rescuing people you thought belonged to you. They're doing it because we made a choice. We chose to value each other more than our own survival. You can't understand that because you've never made a choice in your existence. You're just a machine running programs written eons ago. But we're alive. The Alana copy flickered, its form destabilizing. Around them, the structure began to shake violently. Alarms blared from the shuttle far below, and Alina heard Chen's voice crackling over her communicator.
Captain?
Whatever you're doing, it's working. The structures, systems, are failing. It's trying to purge us. Then let it try. Alina shouted back. She grabbed the young man's hand. Come on, we're getting out of here. They ran across the platform toward an opening that had appeared in the wall, a passage that seemed to lead back down toward the main chamber. Behind them, the pillar collapsed into chaos, cycling through forms so rapidly they blurred together. The structure's intelligence was breaking down, unable to reconcile the contradiction humanity represented. Alina and her companion burst back into the main chamber to find the shuttle loaded with survivors, its engines roaring as Rodriguez fought to keep it stable against the structure's convulsions. The remaining pods were falling from the ceiling, their tethers severed by the system's collapse.
Captain?
Rodriguez screamed, bringing the shuttle close to their platform. Jump! Alina didn't hesitate. She and the young man leaped together, crossing the gap between the platform and the shuttle's open bay. Hands grabbed them, pulling them inside, and Rodriguez slammed the throttle forward. The shuttle shot through the collapsing chamber, dodging falling debris and the grasping limbs of the structure's dying defenders. The tunnel they'd entered through was closing, the walls contracting in a final attempt to trap them. Alina pushed her way to the cockpit, taking the co-pilot's seat. Give me weapons control. Rodriguez transferred it without question. Alina targeted the tunnel's narrowing opening and fired every missile the shuttle carried. The explosions tore through the organic material, blasting a hole just wide enough for the shuttle to scrape through. They emerged into open space as the structure behind them began to fold in on itself, imploding in a cascade of geometric impossibilities. The Meridian was waiting, its hangar bay open and ready. Rodriguez brought the shuttle in hard, and they skidded across the deck plating, finally coming to rest against the far wall. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Alina heard it. Someone was crying, and then someone else was laughing. And then all the survivors were making noise. Any noise. Reasserting their humanity after months of silent horror, Alina unbuckled her harness and moved. Back into the passenger compartment, the survivors looked up at her with haunted eyes, but there was also gratitude there. And something else. Welcome back, she said simply. On the bridge later, Alina watched through the viewport as the structure completed its collapse. Shrinking down to a singularity before vanishing entirely, whatever intelligence had created it was gone, erased by its own inability to comprehend the species it had tried to consume. Final count, Captain Chen reported. We recovered 417 survivors out of 4,000. The others were already gone when we arrived. 417. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was 417 people who would go home, who would see their families again, who would tell the story of what happened here. Set course for Earth, Alina commanded. And Chen? Send a message ahead. Tell them we encountered a predator species. Tell them we fought back. And tell them we won, Captain. As the Meridian turned toward home, Alina allowed herself a moment of exhaustion, sinking into her command chair. They had won this battle, but she knew it was just the beginning. The universe was vast and filled with dangers. Humanity was only beginning to understand, but humanity would face those dangers. The same way they always had together. Stubborn, inefficient, and absolutely refusing to surrender. The young man she'd rescued approached her station, his steps still uncertain, but growing stronger. "Captain Voss, I wanted to thank you for not giving up on us." Lena looked up at him and smiled. "That's what humans do. We don't give up on each other. Ever." He nodded, understanding passing between them without need for further words. He'd been to the edge of extinction and back, had his mind violated by an intelligence beyond comprehension. And yet here he stood, choosing to keep going. That was humanity. That was what made them special in a universe full of wonders and horrors. They were survivors. They were fighters. They were hope incarnate, and the galaxy had better be ready for them.